The job nobody wanted. Sarah needed the money. That's what she kept telling herself as she pulled into the empty parking lot of Mercy General Hospital at 10:45 p.m. The building had been closed for 3 years, but the city still needed someone to check on it twice a week. Night security. Easy money, they said. Just walk around with a flashlight, make sure no one broke in, fill out a report. Nobody mentioned why the last 4 security guards had quit. The October wind pushed dead leaves across the cracked pavement as Sarah grabbed her flashlight and clipboard from the passenger seat. The hospital loomed above her, 7 stories of broken windows and peeling paint. During the day, it just looked sad and forgotten. At night, it looked hungry. She checked her phone. 10:47 p.m. Her shift didn't start until 11, but she wanted to get this over with. Sarah had worked night shifts before. Gas stations, warehouses, office buildings. This was just another empty building. Nothing special about it. That's what she told herself as she walked toward the main entrance. The key turned easily in the lock. Too easily, like the door wanted to be opened. The lobby stretched out in front of her, filled with shadows that seemed to move when she wasn't looking directly at them. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing overturned chairs and a reception desk covered in dust. "Hello?" she called out, her voice echoing off the walls. "Security check." The echo came back wrong. It sounded like someone else's voice. Sarah shook her head. "First night nerves, that's all." She pulled out her clipboard and started her rounds. The checklist was simple. Check each floor, note any damage or signs of break-ins, return to the lobby, file the report. 2 hours of work max. She started with the first floor. The hallways stretched out like tunnels, her flashlight beam barely reaching the ends. Patient rooms lined both sides, their doors hanging open like mouths. Some still had hospital beds inside, rusted and broken. Others were completely empty, except for stains on the walls that looked suspiciously like... Sarah stopped walking. Had she heard footsteps behind her? She turned around, flashlight sweeping the hallway. Nothing, just her own footprints in the dust. "Hello?" she called again. "Is someone there?" Silence. Then, from somewhere above her, the sound of a door slamming shut. Sarah's heart started beating faster. The building was supposed to be empty. All the doors were supposed to be locked from the outside. But she'd heard that slam as clear as day. She pulled out her phone to call her supervisor, then remembered there was no cell service inside the building. The thick walls blocked everything. She was completely alone. "Not alone," whispered a voice in her head. "Never alone here." Sarah pushed the thought away and continued her rounds. The cafeteria was next, a large room filled with tables and chairs covered in white sheets. At least, she thought they were white. In the darkness, they looked gray and stained. Her flashlight beam played across them, creating shadows that looked like people sitting at the tables. She was halfway across the room when she heard it. Beep, beep, beep. The sound was coming from the kitchen. Sarah knew that sound. She'd heard it in every hospital she'd ever visited. It was the sound of a heart monitor. But there was no power in this building. Hadn't been for 3 years. Beep, beep, beep. Sarah's hands were shaking as she pushed through the kitchen doors. The sound was louder now, more insistent. Her flashlight beam swept across rusted equipment and moldy countertops, searching for the source. And then she found it. In the corner of the kitchen, sitting on a prep table, was an old heart monitor. The screen was black, the power cord unplugged and frayed, but the sound was definitely coming from it. Beep, beep, beep. Sarah stepped closer, her breath fogging in the cold air. As she did, the beeping stopped. The silence was worse than the sound. She reached out with one trembling finger and touched the machine. It was ice cold, dead. There was no way it could have been making that noise, but she had heard it. She knew she had heard it. A new sound reached her ears. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming from the hallway behind her. The kind of footsteps that belonged to someone who didn't want to be heard. Sarah spun around, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The hallway was empty, but the footsteps continued, getting closer. She could hear them clearly now. Step, step, step. Like someone walking in hospital slippers, the kind that whispered against the floor. "Who's there?" Sarah called out, her voice higher than she intended. "This is private property. You need to leave." The footsteps stopped. Sarah waited, her heart pounding so loud she was sure whoever was out there could hear it. Seconds stretched into minutes. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. She was starting to think she'd imagined it all when she heard something that made her blood turn to ice. Her own voice echoing from somewhere deep in the hospital. "Who's there?" "This is private property. You need to leave." But the voice was wrong. It was her voice, but older, sadder, like it was coming from someone who had been asking that same question for a very long time. Sarah ran. She burst through the kitchen doors and sprinted down the hallway, her flashlight beam bouncing wildly. Behind her, she could hear the footsteps again, faster now, trying to keep up. She reached the stairwell and started climbing, taking the steps 2 at a time. 2nd floor, 3rd floor, 4th floor. She didn't stop until she reached the 5th floor, the old psychiatric ward. Only then did she realize her mistake. The footsteps had stopped following her. Everything was quiet, too quiet, and she was no longer on the 1st floor where she could easily escape. Sarah tried to calm her breathing as she looked around. The psychiatric ward was different from the other floors. The walls were painted a sickly green color, and there were bars on some of the windows. The doors here had small windows with wire mesh, and some of them were padded. She checked her watch. 11:23 p.m. She'd only been in the building for 36 minutes, but it felt like hours. Her job was to check every floor. That meant she still had 3 floors to go, including the basement. The thought of going down there made her stomach turn, but she needed this job. She needed the money. Sarah took a deep breath and started walking down the hallway. The rooms here were smaller than the ones downstairs, and many of them still had their original signs. Quiet room, isolation, therapy. She was checking one of the therapy rooms when she heard it again. Her own voice, coming from somewhere nearby. "Hello? Is someone there?" This time, the voice was closer. Much closer. Sarah backed out of the room and looked down the hallway. At the far end, barely visible in the darkness, she could see a figure standing by the nurse's station. The figure was wearing a security guard uniform. The figure was holding a flashlight. The figure looked exactly like her. Sarah's scream echoed through the empty hospital as she ran toward the stairwell. But as she reached for the door handle, she heard something that made her freeze. Laughter, coming from the stairwell below. It was her own laughter, but wrong. Like someone had recorded it and played it back too slowly. She looked back down the hallway. The figure was gone. Sarah was trapped on the 5th floor of an abandoned hospital, and something was wearing her face. Her shift had barely begun. Sarah pressed her back against the stairwell door, trying to think. The laughter had stopped, but she could still hear movement below. Slow, shuffling sounds, like someone dragging their feet. She looked at her phone, still no signal. 11:31 p.m. She'd been in the building for less than an hour, but already everything felt wrong. The air was too cold, the shadows too dark, and that thing wearing her face. She shook her head. There had to be an explanation. Maybe it was another security guard, someone who'd gotten in before her. Maybe the uniform company had given them the same outfit. Maybe in the darkness, she'd just thought it looked like her. But she knew that wasn't true. She'd seen her own face staring back at her from the end of that hallway. A new sound reached her ears. Crying. Someone was crying, and it was coming from one of the rooms on this floor. Sarah knew she should leave. Every instinct told her to run down those stairs and out of this building, no matter what was waiting for her. But the crying sounded so real, so human. What if someone was actually trapped up here? She pulled out her flashlight and started walking toward the sound. The crying was coming from room 507. The door was slightly open, and there was a soft light coming from inside. Not electric light, more like candlelight, flickering and warm. Sarah pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room had been converted into a makeshift living space. There was a mattress on the floor covered with clean blankets. Candles sat on makeshift tables made from hospital equipment. Personal belongings were scattered around, clothes, books, photographs, and sitting on the mattress, crying softly, was a woman in her 60s. "Ma'am," Sarah said gently, "are you okay?" The woman looked up. Her eyes were red from crying, but she smiled when she saw Sarah. "Oh, thank goodness," the woman said. "I thought I was going to be alone all night. I'm Margaret." "I'm Sarah. I'm with security." "Ma'am, you can't be here. This building is condemned." Margaret laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Condemned? Honey, I've been living here for 2 years. This is my home?" Sarah looked around the room again. Now that her eyes had adjusted, she could see that Margaret had really made this place livable. Now, the candles provided light and warmth, and she'd cleaned everything thoroughly. "But there's no power, no water," Sarah said. "How do you—" "The water still works in some of the bathrooms," Margaret explained. "And I have a camping stove for cooking. I know it's not much, but it's better than the streets." Sarah felt a pang of sympathy. She'd been homeless once, years ago. She understood why someone might choose an abandoned building over a shelter. "Look," Sarah said, sitting down on a chair Margaret had fashioned from a wheelchair. "I won't report you tonight, but you really should find somewhere safer to stay. This place, there's something wrong with it." Margaret's expression changed. The sadness in her eyes was replaced by something else. Fear. "You've seen them too," Margaret whispered. "Seen what?" "The others. The ones who used to work here. They never really left, you know." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" Margaret got up and walked to the window. She pulled back a curtain made from a hospital sheet and looked out at the parking lot below. "This place, it holds on to people," Margaret said. "Some of the staff, some of the patients, they died here. And when a place sees that much death, that much pain, it remembers." "That's just stories," Sarah said, but her voice wasn't convincing even to herself. "Is it?" Margaret turned back to her. "You've been here, what, an hour? And you've already seen things you can't explain, haven't you?" Sarah didn't answer, but Margaret nodded as if she had. "The first time I saw one of them, I thought I was going crazy," Margaret continued. "It was Dr. Patterson. He used to run the psychiatric ward. Died of a heart attack right here in this room, actually. That's why I chose it. I figured if his spirit was going to be anywhere, it would be here. And he was always kind to people. You're saying you chose to live in a room where someone died? Honey, someone died in every room in this hospital. At least Dr. Patterson was a good man. Margaret walked to a small table and picked up a framed photograph. She handed it to Sarah. The photo showed a man in his 50s wearing a doctor's coat. He had kind eyes and a gentle smile. That's him, Margaret said. I found this photo in his old office. He watches over me, makes sure I'm safe. Sarah stared at the photo. Something about the man's face seemed familiar, but she couldn't place it. Margaret, she said slowly, when did you say Dr. Patterson died? Sarah looked around the room. In the corner, she could see an old reclining chair. It was the only piece of furniture that didn't fit with Margaret's makeshift home. It looked like it belonged to the hospital. Is that his chair? Sarah asked. Margaret nodded. I couldn't bring myself to move it. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I can see him sitting there, watching over me. Sarah's flashlight beam swept across the chair. For just a moment, she could have sworn she saw the outline of a person sitting in it. But when she looked directly at it, there was nothing there. Margaret, I think you should come with me, Sarah said. We can find you somewhere safe to stay, somewhere with heat and proper food. I can't leave, Margaret said firmly. This is where I belong now. And besides, Dr. Patterson needs me. Doctor Patterson is dead. So are a lot of people in this hospital. That doesn't mean they're gone. A new sound interrupted their conversation. Footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate. Margaret smiled. That'll be Nurse Williams. She makes her rounds every night at 11:45, right on time, just like when she was alive. Sarah grabbed Margaret's arm. We need to hide. Hide? Why would we hide from Nurse Williams? Because whatever's walking out there isn't human. Margaret looked at Sarah with pity in her eyes. Honey, none of us are really human anymore. We're all just echoes of what we used to be. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. Sarah held her breath, waiting. The door was slightly open, and she could see a shadow in the gap. Someone was standing right outside. 3 soft knocks came from the door. Come in, dear, Margaret called out cheerfully. No, Sarah whispered. Don't. The door swung open. Standing in the doorway was a woman in a nurse's uniform. She was tall and thin, with gray hair pulled back in a bun. Her uniform was clean and pressed, like she'd just started her shift. But her face was wrong. It was too pale, too still. And when she smiled, Sarah could see that her teeth were black. Good evening, Margaret, the nurse said in a voice like rustling leaves. I see you have a visitor. This is Sarah, Margaret said warmly. She's the new security guard. The nurse's dead eyes fixed on Sarah. New security guard? How wonderful. It's been so long since we've had proper security here. Sarah wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. The nurse's gaze held her frozen in place. I was just telling Sarah about Dr. Patterson, Margaret continued, oblivious to Sarah's terror. Oh yes, the good doctor, the nurse said, her smile widening. He's been waiting to meet you, Sarah. He's very excited about your arrival. I need to go, Sarah managed to whisper. Go? The nurse tilted her head like a bird examining a worm. But you've only just arrived. We have so much to show you. Sarah forced herself to move, taking a step toward the door. The nurse didn't stop her, but she didn't move aside either. Please, Sarah said. I just need to finish my rounds and leave. "Of course," the nurse said. "Your rounds. How dutiful of you. Tell me, Sarah, have you checked the basement yet?" Sarah's heart sank. "No." "Oh, you must check the basement. That's where we keep the most interesting patients, the ones who couldn't be helped upstairs." The nurse finally stepped aside, but as Sarah passed her, she felt cold fingers brush against her arm. "We'll be seeing you again very soon, Sarah," the nurse whispered. "Very soon indeed." Sarah ran from the room, leaving Margaret behind. She could hear their voices as she fled down the hallway. Margaret's warm and human, the nurse's cold and hollow. "She seems nice," Margaret was saying. "Oh yes," the nurse replied. "She'll fit in perfectly here. Just perfectly." Sarah reached the stairwell and started climbing. She needed to get to the top floor, finish her rounds, and get out of this place. But as she climbed, she could hear more voices below her. Staff meetings in empty conference rooms, doctors discussing patients who had died years ago, conversations that should have ended long ago but never did. She reached the 6th floor and paused to catch her breath. This had been the children's ward. The walls were painted with faded cartoon characters, and some of the rooms still had small beds inside. Sarah checked her watch. 11:52 p.m. She'd been in the building for over an hour, and she still had 2 floors to go. From somewhere nearby, she heard the sound of children laughing. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to steady her breathing. She was going to finish her job, file her report, and never come back to this place again. But deep down, she was starting to understand what Margaret had meant. This place held on to people, and now it was holding on to her. Sarah stood at the door to the 6th floor, listening to the children's laughter echoing from the empty rooms. The sound was wrong, too distant, too hollow, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. She checked her clipboard with shaking hands. 2 more floors to go, the 7th floor and the basement. Then she could leave this nightmare behind. The 7th floor was administration, offices, filing rooms, meeting spaces. It should be the easiest floor to check. Sarah climbed the stairs quickly, trying to ignore the whispers that seemed to follow her up. The 7th floor was different from the others. While the lower floors felt abandoned, this one felt occupied. The hallways were cleaner, the doors were closed, and she could see light coming from under some of them. Fluorescent light. But there was no power in this building. Sarah walked slowly down the main hallway, her flashlight beam mixing with the impossible light spilling from the offices. As she passed each door, she could hear the sounds of people working, typing, phone conversations, the hum of copy machines. She stopped at the first door and pressed her ear against it. Inside, she could hear a woman's voice talking on the phone. "Yes, I understand the patient in 314 is being difficult, but we can't just increase his medication without proper documentation." Sarah tried the door handle. Locked. She moved to the next door. More sounds of office work, but when she tried this handle, it was locked too. Every door on the floor was locked, but the sounds continued. People working the night shift in an abandoned hospital, dealing with patients who had died years ago. Sarah was halfway down the hall when she heard her name. "Sarah Chen, please report to the administrator's office immediately." The voice was coming from speakers mounted on the ceiling. The same speakers that had been used to page doctors and nurses when the hospital was operational. But the speakers had no power, just like everything else in this building. "Sarah Chen, please report to the administrator's office immediately." The voice was getting more insistent. Sarah looked at the directory on the wall. Administrator's office, room 712. She didn't want to go. Every instinct told her to turn around and run. But the voice kept calling her name, and she found her feet carrying her toward room 712. The door was open. Inside, she could see a large office with a desk, filing cabinets, and a conference table. A man in a suit was sitting behind the desk, writing in a ledger. He looked up when Sarah appeared in the doorway. "Ah, Sarah," he said with a smile. "Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." Sarah remained in the doorway. The man looked normal enough. Middle-aged, professional, the kind of administrator you'd expect to find in a hospital, but his eyes were too bright, and when he smiled, she couldn't see his teeth. "I'm sorry," Sarah said. "I think there's been a mistake. I'm just doing security rounds." "Oh, I know exactly who you are," the man said. Sarah Chen, age 28, recently laid off from her job at the warehouse, living alone in a studio apartment on Elm Street. No family, no close friends. No one who would miss you if you didn't come home tonight. Sarah's blood turned to ice. "How do you know that?" "I know everything about everyone who enters this hospital," the man said, still smiling. "It's my job to know. Please, sit down. We have so much to discuss." "I need to finish my rounds," Sarah said, backing away from the door. "Your rounds can wait. We need to talk about your future here at Mercy General. This hospital is closed." The man laughed, but it sounded like paper being torn. "Closed? Sarah, we've never been busier. We have patients on every floor, a full staff working around the clock. We're practically bursting at the seams." Sarah looked around the office. On the walls, she could see certificates and awards, all made out to Dr. Richard Blackwood, Chief Administrator. But the dates on the certificates were wrong. Some of them were from next year, some were from 10 years in the future. "Dr. Blackwood," Sarah said slowly. "When did you start working here?" "Oh, I've been here forever," he said. "Time works differently in hospitals, you know. Minutes feel like hours, hours feel like days, and when you're dead, well, time stops having much meaning at all." Sarah ran. She sprinted down the hallway as Dr. Blackwood's laughter followed her. Behind her, she could hear doors opening and the sounds of footsteps. The night shift was ending, and the staff was going home, all except for her. Sarah reached the stairwell and started down. She'd completed 6 floors. Only the basement remained. The basement. She'd been dreading it all night, and now she understood why. The basement was where this had all started. The basement was where she was supposed to end up. As she descended the stairs, the temperature dropped noticeably. By the time she reached the basement level, she could see her breath in the air. The basement door was different from the others. It was heavier, made of metal instead of wood, and it was covered in warning signs. Authorized personnel only, biological hazard, restricted access. Sarah's hand trembled as she reached for the door handle. It was unlocked. The basement was a maze of narrow corridors and small rooms. This was where the hospital had kept its morgue, its pathology lab, its storage areas for medical waste. The ceiling was lower than the other floors, and Sarah had to duck under pipes and ventilation ducts. Her flashlight beam revealed rooms full of old medical equipment, gurneys, examination tables, machines she couldn't identify. Everything was covered in rust and decay, but she could smell something else underneath it. Formaldehyde, the smell of death, preserved and contained. Sarah followed the main corridor deeper into the basement. The walls here were lined with small rooms, each one sealed with a heavy door. She checked her clipboard and saw that she was supposed to inspect each room. The first room was a storage area filled with old files, patient records dating back decades, all moldering in the damp air. Sarah's flashlight revealed thousands of names, thousands of stories, all abandoned when the hospital closed. The second room was the pathology lab, examination tables with restraints, cabinets full of specimen jars, microscopes and other equipment covered in dust. On one of the tables, Sarah could see dark stains that looked suspiciously like blood, fresh blood. The third room was the morgue. Sarah stood in the doorway, her flashlight beam playing across rows of metal drawers built into the wall. There were dozens of them, each one designed to hold a body, and some of them were open. Sarah counted 6 open drawers, their metal trays pulled out into the room. Each tray was empty, but she could see impressions in the padding where bodies had once lain, recent impressions. A sound from behind her made Sarah spin around. Standing in the corridor was a man in scrubs, wearing a surgical mask and gloves. He was tall and thin, with dark hair and tired eyes. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice muffled by the mask. "I'm doing security rounds," Sarah replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Security rounds ended hours ago. It's time for the night shift now." The man stepped closer, and Sarah could see that his scrubs were stained with something dark. Old blood, maybe, or something worse. "I'm Dr. Hayes," he said. "I run the night shift down here. We've been expecting you." "Expecting me?" "Oh yes. We always need new staff. The work down here is demanding. People don't last long." Sarah backed into the morgue, but Dr. Hayes followed her. "Don't be afraid," he said. "The transition is actually quite peaceful. Most people don't even realize it's happening until it's over." Sarah's back hit one of the open drawers. She was trapped between the metal tray and the advancing doctor. "What transition?" she asked. Dr. Hayes pulled down his surgical mask, revealing a face that was gaunt and pale. When he smiled, Sarah could see that his gums were black and his teeth were filed to points. The transition from living to dead, of course, from visitor to resident, from security guard to patient. He reached for her with hands that were too cold and too strong. Sarah screamed and tried to dodge past him, but he was faster than he looked. His fingers closed around her arm, and she could feel the cold spreading through her body. "Don't fight it," Dr. Hayes whispered. "Everyone ends up down here eventually. It's just a matter of time." Sarah's vision was starting to blur. The cold was spreading from her arm to her chest, slowing her heartbeat, making it hard to breathe. But then she heard something that made her fight back with renewed strength. Her own voice, coming from one of the open drawers. "Help me. Please. Someone help me." Sarah looked at the drawer and saw herself lying on the metal tray. But this version of herself was pale and still, with dark circles under her eyes and lips that were blue from cold. "That's your future, Doctor," Hayes said. "That's where you belong." "No," Sarah said, and pulled free from his grip. She ran from the morgue and back into the corridor, Doctor Hayes close behind her. But as she ran, she could hear more voices calling her name. All of them were her own voice, coming from different rooms, different times. The basement was full of versions of herself. Sarah, who had gotten lost. Sarah, who had been caught. Sarah, who had never made it out. She reached the stairs and started climbing, taking them 3 at a time. Behind her, she could hear Dr. Hayes calling out, "You can't leave, Sarah. You belong to the hospital now." But Sarah kept climbing. 1st floor, 2nd floor, 3rd floor. She could see the exit now, could see her car waiting in the parking lot. She was almost to the lobby when she heard the voice that stopped her cold. "Sarah? Is that you?" She turned around and saw herself standing at the bottom of the stairs. This version of herself was wearing the same security guard uniform, holding the same flashlight, but her eyes were empty and her skin was gray. "I've been waiting for you," the other Sarah said. "We all have." Sarah looked around the lobby and realized it was full of people. Doctors, nurses, patients, administrators, all of them dead, all of them watching her. And in the center of the group, she saw Margaret, still alive, but no longer alone. "Welcome home, Sarah," Margaret said with a sad smile. "Welcome to the night shift." Sarah's scream echoed through the empty hospital as she realized the truth. She had never been the first security guard to work here. She was just the latest in a long line of people who had thought they could walk into Mercy General and walk back out. The hospital had been waiting for her, and now it would never let her go. Sarah stared at her own dead face in the lobby of Mercy General Hospital. Around her, the ghostly staff watched with empty eyes, waiting to see what she would do. "This isn't real," Sarah whispered. "This is just a nightmare." The other Sarah smiled, revealing teeth that were black and broken. "That's what I thought too at first. But nightmares end when you wake up. This doesn't end. It just goes on and on." "You're not me," Sarah said, backing toward the exit. "You're just some hallucination." "I'm you from 3 hours ago," the dead Sarah replied. "I'm what you'll be in 3 hours." Sarah's hand found the door handle behind her. It turned easily, and she burst out into the parking lot. The cold October air hit her face like a slap, and she ran toward her car. But her car wasn't there. The parking lot was empty, except for other vehicles she didn't recognize. Old cars, rusted and broken, arranged in neat rows like they'd been there for years. Sarah spun around, looking for her Honda Civic. It was nowhere to be seen. "Looking for your car?" Sarah turned to see Margaret standing in the hospital entrance. She was no longer alone. Dr. Patterson stood beside her, solid and real, wearing his white coat. Behind them, Nurse Williams and Dr. Hayes emerged from the building. "Where's my car?" Sarah demanded. "Same place everyone's car goes," Margaret said gently. "Same place you're going. You just haven't accepted it yet." "I'm leaving," Sarah said. "I'm walking out of here, and I'm never coming back." She started walking toward the road, but Margaret called after her. "Sarah, honey, look at your hands." Sarah looked down. Her hands were pale in the moonlight, but that wasn't what made her stomach drop. It was the way the moonlight seemed to pass through them, like they were made of glass. "No," Sarah whispered. "No, no, no." She held her hands up to the streetlight. She could see the light shining through her fingers, see the bones underneath her skin. "When?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "In the basement," Dr. Hayes said from behind her. "When I touched your arm. The cold you felt wasn't fear, Sarah. It was death." Sarah looked at the hospital staff gathered around her. They all looked solid, real, but she could see through them too, like shadows cast by moonlight. "We're all dead," she said. "We're all working the night shift," Margaret corrected. "There's a difference." "What difference?" Dr. Patterson stepped forward. His voice was kind, the same voice that had comforted patients for decades. "The living work during the day," he explained. "They come and go, start their shifts, and end them. But the night shift is different. The night shift is forever." Sarah looked around at the abandoned hospital. "But this place is closed. There are no patients." "Oh, but there are," Nurse Williams said with her black-toothed smile. "The patients are still here, Sarah. They've always been here, and they need someone to take care of them." As if summoned by her words, figures began emerging from the hospital. Men and women in hospital gowns, some walking, some being wheeled in chairs. They moved slowly, purposefully, like sleepwalkers. But their eyes were alert, hungry. "Room 237 needs his pain medication," Nurse Williams said, consulting a chart that appeared in her hands. "Mrs. Henderson in 315 is asking for ice chips, and the children in the ward are having nightmares again." "I can't," Sarah said. "I don't know how to be a nurse." "You'll learn, doctor," Patterson said. "We all learned. That's what the night shift is for, learning how to take care of the ones who never got to leave." The patients were gathering around Sarah now, reaching out with pale hands. She could feel their need, their desperation. They had been waiting so long for someone to help them. "Please," whispered a man in a hospital gown. "I've been waiting for my medication for 3 years." "The pain," moaned a woman in a wheelchair. "Make the pain stop." "I want to go home," cried a child who couldn't have been more than 7 years old. "When can I go home?" Sarah looked at their faces and saw decades of suffering. These weren't just echoes or hallucinations. These were real people who had died in this hospital, who had never found peace. "Why me?" Sarah asked. "Because you're kind," Margaret said. "Because you cared enough to check on an old homeless woman instead of just reporting her. Because you have compassion." "The hospital knows," Dr. Hayes added. "It chooses people who will take care of the patients, people who won't abandon them." Sarah looked at the crowd of patients surrounding her. Children with leukemia, elderly people with dementia, accident victims who had died on the operating table, all of them looking at her with hope in their eyes. "What if I refuse?" she asked. The hope in their eyes turned to desperation. The child who wanted to go home started crying. The man asking for medication fell to his knees. The woman in the wheelchair let out a wail of anguish that echoed across the parking lot. "You can't refuse," Dr. Patterson said sadly. "No one can refuse. The hospital won't let you." As if to prove his point, Sarah tried to take a step away from the group. Her legs wouldn't move. She looked down and saw that her feet were sinking into the asphalt like it was quicksand. "Help me!" she screamed, but the hospital staff just watched with pity in their eyes. "The hospital is claiming you," Margaret explained. "It's pulling you back where you belong." Sarah was sinking deeper now, the asphalt up to her ankles. She struggled and fought, but it only made her sink faster. "Please," she begged. "I have a life. I have plans. I was going to find a better job, maybe go back to school." "We all had plans," Nurse Williams said. "I was going to retire next year. Dr. Hayes was engaged to be married. Dr. Patterson had grandchildren he wanted to watch grow up. But the hospital needed us more," Dr. Patterson added. "And now it needs you." The asphalt was up to Sarah's knees now. In desperation, she pulled out her phone and tried to call for help, but the screen was black, dead, just like everything else in this place. "Sarah," Margaret said gently, "fighting it only makes it worse. Accept your place here, and the transition will be easier." "What transition?" Sarah gasped, still struggling against the pulling force. "From living to working," Dr. Hayes said. "From visitor to resident. From security guard to caregiver." The patients were gathering closer now, reaching out their hands to her. But instead of grabbing her, they were offering comfort. "It's not so bad," whispered the elderly man. "Once you accept it, the fear goes away." "We need you," said the little girl. "We've been waiting so long for someone to take care of us." "You won't be alone," promised the woman in the wheelchair. "We're all here together." Sarah looked at their faces and realized something that made her stop struggling. These weren't monsters or demons. They were just people who had died in pain, who had never found peace, who needed someone to care for them. "How long have you been waiting?" she asked the little girl. 15 years, the child replied. "I died during surgery. My parents never came to visit me after that. I've been waiting for someone to read me a bedtime story." Sarah's heart broke. She looked around at all the other patients, each one with their own story of abandonment and neglect. "The living world moves on," Dr. Patterson explained, "but the dead are forgotten, except here. Here, we remember everyone." The asphalt had stopped pulling at Sarah's legs. She was still sinking, but slowly now, gently, like the hospital was embracing her rather than devouring her. "What will happen to me?" she asked. "You'll work the night shift," Margaret said. "Forever, taking care of the ones who need it most. And in return, you'll never be alone. You'll never be forgotten. You'll have purpose." Sarah thought about her life outside this hospital, her empty apartment, her lack of friends or family, her string of dead-end jobs. Had she really been living or just existing? "Will it hurt?" she asked. "Only for a moment," Dr. Hayes said. "Then you'll understand. Then you'll be home." The asphalt was up to Sarah's waist now. She could feel the coldness spreading through her body, the same coldness she'd felt in the basement. But this time, she didn't fight it. "What do I need to do?" she asked. Dr. Patterson smiled, and for the first time since she'd entered the hospital, it was a genuinely warm smile. "Just let go," he said. "Let go of the world that never really wanted you, and embrace the world that needs you." Sarah closed her eyes and stopped struggling. The coldness spread through her chest, slowing her heartbeat, making it hard to breathe. But along with the cold came something else: peace. For the first time in years, Sarah felt like she belonged somewhere. When she opened her eyes again, she was standing in the hospital lobby, wearing clean scrubs and holding a clipboard. The asphalt was gone. The parking lot was gone. There was only the hospital and the people who needed her. "Welcome to the night shift," Margaret said, appearing beside her. "Your first patient is in room 237. He's been waiting for his pain medication for 3 years." Sarah looked at the clipboard in her hands. It was filled with patient assignments, medication schedules, and care plans. Somehow she understood all of it. The knowledge had come with the transformation. "Room 237, she repeated. "I'll take care of him." As she walked toward the elevator, she heard Dr. Patterson speaking to someone behind her. "Doctor, we have a new security position opening up. The city is sending someone tomorrow night." Sarah smiled. The cycle would continue. The hospital would always need new staff, and there would always be people desperate enough for work to take the job. But now she understood the truth that Margaret had tried to tell her earlier. This wasn't a prison. It was a sanctuary. Outside this hospital, she had been alone, forgotten, struggling to survive in a world that didn't care about her. But here, she had purpose. Here, she was needed. Here, she was home. Sarah pressed the elevator button and waited. As the doors opened, she could hear the sounds of the night shift beginning. Doctors making their rounds, nurses dispensing medication, orderlies helping patients who couldn't help themselves. All of them dead. All of them working. All of them caring for the ones who had been left behind. Sarah stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the second floor. Room 237 was waiting for her, and she had work to do. As the elevator doors closed, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the polished metal. She looked peaceful, content. She looked like she belonged. The elevator began to rise, carrying her up into the hospital where she would work forever, taking care of the forgotten dead, part of a night shift that would never end. And for the first time in her life, Sarah Chen was exactly where she was supposed to be. The next night, Detective Mike Rodriguez stood in the parking lot of Mercy General Hospital, staring at the abandoned Honda Civic that had been found there that morning. The car belonged to Sarah Chen, a security guard who had been reported missing by her employer when she failed to show up for her next scheduled shift. "Any signs of foul play?" his partner asked. Mike shook his head. "Car's locked. Keys are missing. No signs of struggle. Could be she just wandered off." "Homeless people sometimes sleep in these old buildings," his partner suggested. "Maybe she's holed up inside." Mike looked up at the dark windows of the hospital. Something about the building made him uncomfortable, though he couldn't say why. "Should we check inside?" his partner asked. "Building's been condemned for 3 years," Mike replied. "Doors are all locked. Security system is still active. If she got in, she'd have had to break something." They walked around the building, checking all the entrances. Every door was secure, every window intact. There was no way Sarah Chen could have gotten inside, but Mike couldn't shake the feeling that she was in there somewhere. As they walked back to their patrol car, Mike's radio crackled to life. "All units, we have a missing person report. 28-year-old female, last seen, applying for a security position at the old hospital district." Mike looked back at the building one more time. In one of the upper windows, he could have sworn he saw a figure in scrubs, watching them from behind the glass. But when he looked again, the window was empty. "Come on," his partner said. "Let's go check out that new missing person case." As they drove away, Mike made a mental note to tell the city to hire better security for the old hospital. Too many people had gone missing in that area lately, but he never followed up on that note. And 3 weeks later, when the city called him about taking a part-time security job to make some extra money, Mike Rodriguez said yes without hesitation. After all, how hard could it be to watch an empty building? The night shift at Mercy General Hospital was always looking for new staff, and Mike Rodriguez needed the money.